All right, everyone. How you doing? Give me a round of emojis or emotes or whatever they call this. I don't know. If you can hear my voice well. I'm sorry we have to do it the old school way, but we have to do it the old school way. I still haven't set up my new foundation yet. I know I promised something beyond spaces, but we'll just have to stick with this for a while. I'm gonna talk about a myriad of things. Psychic, thank you, my brother. A myriad of things. I was um, literally just getting into listening to the Jeffrey Epstein interview that was just recently put out. Among other things, many things going on behind the scenes, on the surface layer. So I'm going to touch a few, specific objects that I'm fascinated with, um, in terms of like what's been happening recently. There is there are many points, philosophical and practical, that are very important to understand if you're going through, well, the times that we are going through, in order to maintain a certain degree of sanity without falling back into slumber, so to speak. So, let's do a little meditation. Primarily, what it boils down to, and I think the Jeffrey Epstein interview is a very clarifying element here, right? Which I found very fascinating. What it almost always boils down to is the degree of intellect and the cadence and grace in how a person communicates, um, that we derive a certain value from, a certain attractiveness or non-attractiveness. At the end of the day, the men and women who sit at the table, and who sit at the tables that matter or seem to matter, um, they all have a heightened understanding, removing all kinds of moral or ethical elements from the discussion, just to remove that for the comfort and luxury, um, of the philosophical debate at hand. Just remove that for a second. There's no moral baseline, so to speak, and all there is left is pure intellectual prowess, right? Um, what it boils down to, again, um, because systemically we are taught that every single opinion matters, that every single human being has an inherent value in their opinions and their worldviews and their theories and so on and so forth. Um, we're taught this by the mainstream media, but then as we're finding out again and again, which is an inevitable truth, it's an inevitable arc or manta almost that we arrive to, is that a very clear cut type of individual, right, gets to decide and discern the realities of life among others who also share that knack for communication, the gift of gab, so to speak, and then the intellectual prowess to communicate their points with clarity and a certain cadence and grace, like we said, regardless of what's being communicated, regardless of what's being talked about. At the end of the day, every high profile court case, every high profile anything that is a discussion really that is removed from the violent affair that is physical altercation and conflict, boils down to it just being a conversation. So how far can you take something within that framework of it just being a conversation? Well, it largely depends on the intellectual faculties that you possess. Now, why am I talking about these things in a sort of like an abstract manner? Is because some people are natural orators, right? They speak well. They don't have the stuff like that when they speak. And other people are intellectually confident in what they talk about. And sometimes you get the cataclysmic event of these two things combining. And when these two things combine, there's a certain authoritative element that enters sort of like the auric field of said person. So this could be sort of like a feminine touch. It could be a masculine respect for competence, which exists unilaterally in society, right? So regardless of which layer of society you question, of any society, unequivocally, there is a natural authoritative respect towards people who can communicate well, but not on an influencer type of level, right? So the influencer is a completely different beast or creature or whatever. The influencer is an attention farmer. But when things get serious, when it really comes down to talking about matters of money and global leadership and politics and yeah, magic and the occult and so on and so forth, everyone in any given room understands who needs to take the mic on this one, right? And it's very clearly understood. And it's always the person with the most degree of intellect and analytical skill. And it's almost never the person with the right moral and ethical framework, right? I have a neighbor lady who's a very nice person, who will give very informed, morally and ethically advice, who will put you on the right path in life, but they will fail to explain to you why, on a philosophical level, that is the right path, right? So they have an intuitive knowing, so to speak, but how they communicate it, how they present it, so the presentation of that is a little bit flawed. And then there's the opposite of that, the person with the opposite effect that is almost boundless in the sense where they're not changed by morality and ethics, where they possess the gift of gab, like we said, who will then be able to sell you let's call it the unethical or the immoral path, right? From a philosophical standpoint, which will seem sort of plausible, right? If you're not, how to say, intellectually gifted. So can you be impressed that for centuries of the existence of what we would call the modern civilized age, for centuries, the average man or the average human has not found within them the ability to differentiate these two archetypal figures from one another. So to this day, right, the greatest argument one can make for themselves is to be a strong communicator. And everything else falls into place for them, i- in regards to how they are perceived. So if there's a certain sophistication to you, or let's say there's a certain sophistication to me, me, you know my history, you know how I converse with others, right? You know the depths of my mind and the analytical depths of my mind. And then the next day you step out and you see me, I don't know, in a cave somewhere, and I'm smashing my forehead into cold stone, right? And you would probably not assume, I should say, that well, this is a degenerate primate. What are they doing? They're self-harming. You would see it as probably at first, or you would have a an inherent need or desire because of past programming to somehow assign a unique significance to the utmostly ridiculous thing I'm doing, which is I'm smashing my forehead onto cold stone. I will probably bleed out and die from doing so. But there's a certain artistic value that your mind wants to assign to be acting that way, right? You want there to be more depth to my action because again, my story, my track record, so to speak, right, is that is one of, you know, self-reflection and analytical thinking and deep, pondering on this or that thought or philosophy or idea. So it's the same effect here when you see someone with intellectual depth and perhaps even philosophical depth in a more technical sense, let's say in the case of Epstein. Um, but then you're also coming face to face with them committing these egregious acts. So it's exactly this split that is traumatic for the mind or the collective mind, I should say, right? It's exactly this split that makes you think like, is there more to this story? If Uncle Jack is, well, I know Uncle Jack is a respectable figure on a like intellectually relatively respectable figure, let's say, in your mind, which would be a compliment. But here he is smashing his forehead on cold stone again. Well, there must be some symbolic or artistic value as to why he decided to do so. Or maybe he just went insane from, God knows what. So where your mind goes is not what you're seeing, right? Your mind goes to places, well, there must be more to this. And then you dig deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And your problem is that you can't ever really know, right? Anything could have inspired me to, smash my head on the cold stone. And then, if you ask me, hey, Uncle Jack, well, why did you decide to do that? You're probably going to hear something that's how to say inconceivably dishonest, right? Because, well, if I'm caught smashing my head on cold stone, like I'm probably not in good spirits. That's one. The two, I'm probably not in good health in terms of mental health, right? And three, it at the very least, I am embarrassed. So dishonesty is a sort of a given here. So when someone speaks to you very plainly and they're very open intellectually, right? But you also know that they have darker undertones. You have to understand that this is a person who knows how to lie. And even people who are naturally good actors and or actresses, people who naturally think they know how to lie, don't really know how to lie because how you lie is not through lying. How the expert liar or the expert thief or the expert politician, so to speak, they lie by granting you a vision or an image painted with half truths. You know what a half truth is? A half truth is something that is part of a grander truth, but with elements of that grander truth that are omitted for you to be misled by. Now, this might sound like a handful, but if you went to politics school, let's call it that, but behind the scenes politics school, not the crap they teach in universities, that's the first thing you would learn, right? A truth is not a truth and a lie is not a lie. Now, if you directly tell a complete lie, then you're, not that good on the game. You're really not that great. But what you can do is you can take a truth and you don't even have to twist it. You can just leave out the part of it, right? Tell a half truth and then another half truth and then another half truth and then another. And then now you've painted an image of, you know, well, I'm a righteous angel. But the expectation and the idea and the imagery and the vision that I'm throwing into your mind, into your mind's eye, your vision, is something incomplete. It's something incoherent. And have I told you any lies? No, I haven't. So it's very important to understand how a manipulator's mind functions. And if you don't understand that, which most people can't understand that because most people are surprisingly easy to manipulate, people need to understand that what is holding most capable manipulators back is their that moral and ethical framework that we talked about, not their inability to manipulate, right? Now, why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because anything that comes from the mouth of a person who is a known manipulator on the grandest scale of politics and theater and the political theater, if you cannot take that with a grain of salt, then you are very vulnerable, so to speak, to not take anything with a grain of salt. Now, with that in mind, we have to talk about recent events. And we've already formed a sort of understanding that there is such a thing as a collective consciousness or the collective unconsciousness. There is such a thing. And the formation of the collective unconscious, the physical remnant, so to speak, of the collective unconscious, is the overmind. The overmind, imagine it as a collection of all of our egos. Um, an ego is formed in the absence of truth. Okay? So the function of an ego is to present to you a temporary identity, often caused by loss of memory or memory erasure, as we call it. An ego is designed to give you a temporary identity through which you can self identify while you hunt for the real identity. Now, like we said, trauma on a mass scale has two effects. One of which is conscious fragmentation. When you experience severe trauma, that memory or that portion of memory is taken from the conscious mind, it is fragmented, and then it is portaled into the subconscious mind. And this, like we said in the past, this is a self defense mechanism that your brain has. And the collective ego brain, the collective ego mind, the beast, as we call it, also has this. And because it also has this, it does something like this. When a collective trauma event is experienced, again, same thing like the Epstein files were just released. There is some horrific, horrendous things in there that many people will be emotionally affected by, and for good reason. As that occurs, there will it will create a conscious split, and very much of this trauma will be buried in the collective subconscious. And I know this seems counterproductive. Now, if you were on that wing, if your loyalty was to that wing of that cast of humanity, so to speak, or inhumanity, I should say, it seems counterintuitive to send out waves and waves and waves of highly damaging, traumatic information to the general public, right? But Now, if you're someone who has intellectual prowess, like we said, and you understand how the conscious mind functions, then you also understand that the more traumatic the truth, the less it will be experienced. I understand this is ridiculous for some people to understand, but it is true. It is how psychology works at its basic form. So when a traumatic event is experienced, it will become buried into the subconscious for it to reappear later on at a time when the person who experienced this traumatic event is ready to face it. So it's buying you time. Hey, I had a traumatic event when I was 12 years old. What's going to happen? Well, my mind is going to shelter me from that memory. It's going to bury that memory into my subconscious. It's going to take it there and keep it there. And when time goes on, when I'm 20, 21, 22, 23 years old, and I am stronger and more intelligent, more emotionally prepared, and less vulnerable and exposed to trauma and the effects of trauma, which is insanity, then my brain will slowly start feeding me the fractured memory back again. Well, how does this happen? This happens through dreams, it happens through visions, it happens through these little hints and clues that you receive. And why is the dream the perfect medium for the re-arising of a traumatic past? Right? Because a dream can be forcefully and violently interrupted. It's a big benefit. All right, we're back. Sorry about that. Not sure what happened. But yeah, a dream can be violently interrupted. And one of the benefits of it being so is that if the brain sees that, well, this experience is still too traumatic to fully re-experience, it will be signed off as, well, a vision dream. You will wake up from it and you will live your life as if nothing had happened. But at some point, this dramatic event will keep floating up to the surface again and again. Again, why am I making this example again? Because now, humor me here, okay? On a collective level, when a mind or consciousness is fragmented, and it is fragmented by trauma, mm, the each of these fragments form their own identities, ego identities. Again, like we said, ego in and of itself is a self-defense and repair mechanism for a consciousness to realign itself with its true identity. But because you are a fragment, which is by nature and function fragmented from your actual identity, you do not have an identity anymore. You are not the full mirror, you're just a tiny little piece of it. So what do you do? Well, a formation of a new identity, the master ego, needs to occur, right? So now, as you've been born, you were a child, you grew up, da, 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 you formed this shell. You formed your temporary identity as to, well, who am I? What is my name? Who is my father? Who is my mom? So on and so forth. Who are my parents? Who are my grandparents? And now you've grown attached to this identity, which is you. But then, if you can bring this identity, and it's called an identity because it needs to be identical, right, to the higher identity, your true identity. This is why we call, well, if you're on the same wavelength and blah, 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 this is what it means. Then you will start to experience the effects of memory healing. You will start to experience, guess what? Visions, dreams, synchronicities, so on and so forth. That's the source. That's the primary source from which occulted lessons and spiritual lessons arise. And make no mistake, as you have a personal ID, a transcendent part of you, right? That exists somewhere in the collective unconscious, who is which is a familial link to you, by the way. So does the human race on a collective level. And if you look at some of the most, I don't even know what they're called, black something or whatever, the most secretive, at least in a psychology or a psychological direction. That's particularly my area of interest. I don't know anything about the other stuff. If you see the most high level and high tech example of the most hidden research that is conducted in this field, in this area, you will arrive at a point where matters of the mind and matters of magic and occult transformation and transmutation are talked about in persistently in the same vein. So they are regarded at the forefront of this discussion as one and the same almost. We understand that the workings upon the human mind, what you would call the upside down world, right? Create a shadow element, and this shadow element, when it is dampened but not amplified, amplified means it is manifested in the real world in conscious awareness. So when it is dampened, when it is buried in unawareness, is formless chaos. So to give this thing a form, what is needed? To see a dream, what is needed? To see a vision clearly, what is needed? The inner vision. What is the inner vision? When you close your eyes and your third eye opens, what is the third eye? It is, in fact, the imaginative function. So, those who have a strong imaginative function, not induced by any sort of drug, by the way, because that is a temporary suspension of imagination. But those who by default have a strong imaginative function will have access to more symbolic imagery. Okay, let's explain it this way. Can you imagine an alien being, like a truly alien being? The word alien meaning something so vastly and extraordinarily different from what you know that it is almost inconceivable on a physical level. Can you imagine it? You could imagine an incredible array of beings. So let's say an alien being could be something made of silicon and carbon. It could be shaped like a walking inwards cube with fingers and eyes just plummeting through its body at a constant pace. That's a ridiculous thing to imagine, but notice something important about this thing. It is still a synthesis of what you know. It is still a synthesis of the imagery you have been exposed to through your ego and through the material world. So, whatever your mind forms, whatever type of image your mind forms, is a combination of the imagery that you have been exposed to in the physical plane, correct? Yes. Now, we understand that there are formless and shapeless languages that exist outside of the ego mind. But since the ego mind is only capable of understanding familiar imagery, and then it is also capable of synthesizing familiar imagery into something quote unquote new, then for it to understand the effects of anything paralogical or supernatural, then it must be conveyed to this person through the imaginative function, through the synthesis of familiar imagery. This is why the language of symbols is so prevalent in all religions and all philosophical thought, in all mythologies, and everywhere you go, really. So when you understand this, when you understand that the formation of the very greatest of devils within the human framework, within the framework of our collective imaginations, right, stems not from the actual unconscious mind, not the actual shadow or the null void portal, as we call it, but it stems from our own reinterpretation of the effects of those worlds. Everything, like we say, we live in an input output system. So everything is a feedback mechanism to something else. And once you realize that the pretentiousness of all things that are quote unquote magic or occult or this and that, the pretentiousness of the ritual, the dramatization, excuse me, of the ritual art and the ritual practice is to impress certain belief systems onto the witness. Like I said in my previous blog post, um, it is indistinguishable to work with the human mind and to work with the magical wand. Those two things are indistinguishable from one another. And the best way to hide these things are, well, they're in plain sight. You have your imaginative function, but how much have you truly explored your imaginative function? This is why in my meditation method, I will always teach 5 minutes a day. Try to imagine the most beautiful thing you can. What does that do? That allows your imaginative function to take a life of its own. And then when you imagine a beautiful thing, you imagine that thing again the next same day, and it's not the same thing because it grows, it adapts, because it is you are literally watching your imaginative function grow and increase. You are watching it penetrate new realms of synthesis and thought. And you are watching it in real time as you are doing the meditation upgrade your consciousness, upgrade it in a sense of what it is able to conceive and perceive. That is the magician's tool. Now, outside of the effect of placebo, which is that your visual impressions directly, you know, enhance bodily functions, like how the body works and so on and so forth. Outside of that, the more important element of that is how does the inner state affect the collective state? That's an incredibly complex and sophisticated element that most people are unable to understand. It's not their fault, but it needs a certain fundament. Like I said, pretentious or not, intellectual fundament and the imaginative function to achieve the imagery and the symbolic imagery that it takes to understand it. So when you have someone like this, right, or a cast of people like this who have access to this information, right, minus the imaginative function. So who have access to information that is accessed through the imaginative function, but not with the imaginative function, but through symbology and storytelling and so on and so forth. When you have access to information that you have not personally earned, right? With a high degree of intellect, very strong formed ego bond, so to speak, with the world, with their temporary identity taking over, you are going to receive ignorance. And when you do receive ignorance, which is what we see on the highest echelons and the highest caste of the leaders of humanity and so on and so forth, when you have that information, but it's also mystified and abstract to you what exactly it is that you're interacting and engaging with, which is the collective unconscious. Like I said, the collective unconscious is what most of these ritualists and warlocks and so on and so forth are engaging with, but they come to them in different forms. They come to them in the forms in demonic forms or alien forms or so on and so forth. Now, extraterrestrials exist physically as well, but I'm saying in the sense of human imagination, in this sense. We'll talk about that another time. But when you are interfacing with the collective unconscious, right, then symptomatically how that collective unconscious is viewed and experienced by your brain is, well, devilry, right? And because it is so, these images are frightening. They're very effective at being frightening. And now, because this happens, the formation of the ego on the other side, right, also happens. And like I said, it's a familial bond. That's why the capacity for these things to possess is a reality. So you form an identity now, and because your identity is incomplete, there's a shadow side to you that you are not aware of and you don't know. And that alter ego lives somewhere, right, on the other side of that plane. Now, the journey of life is very much about well, first becoming aware of this and then becoming able to integrate this. But not all people can. And those who can not become victims to it very often, as we see with Epstein and this or that person. Most of the people who are contending with these truths. Again, these are not truths that they've earned on a personal level. It's just truths that they have intergenerationally received through symbolic meanings and factual teachings and so on and so forth. But if you haven't felt this, like I said, right? If you haven't gotten to that point, right, it's very difficult for you to understand the root core of it, which is bliss. So that's what we're dealing with today. If you're curious, if you're wondering, right? And all the appeasement to these gods and idols and so on and so forth, every temple, every this, you know, the buried temples of Lemuria and Atlantis and all those places, right? These are the people that we contend with. Those who have the intellectual prowess and the factual knowing of the existence of a thing, but they don't know the secret to the secret. And the secret to the secret is that they live in an input output type of universe, meaning that they're at all times in with through different imagery and a variety of diversified phenomena interacting with the same one phenomenon. They're interacting with the collective unconscious, which, again, like I said, it has a mind of its own. Your unconscious is that which drives your programming. So when, let's say you're a heavy smoker, you understand smoking is bad for your health, but you still do it. Well, where does that program come from? It comes from the depths of your unconscious that, in truth, wants to see you self deprecate. So you can't say that it doesn't have power over you, or that it doesn't have a mind or a desire of its own, because it's split from you. And whatever is split, this is the law of the cosmos, whatever is split from a consciousness must form its own consciousness. It must form its own ego identity, a temporary ego identity. So if you can't reach your devil, if you can't find your devil, no matter how intellectually gifted you are, no matter how well you communicate your points, no matter how deceitful and manipulative you can be with other people, and God knows it works, right? If you are not morally and ethically within the framework of authenticity, you- not only will you never become aware of that darker side of you, but you will become a victim of it. You will fall victim to it, because a fragmented ego, a split ego, all it can do is reject the other. And when you reject the other, it begins to hate you. And its program becomes to split from you even further. So, as it is internally, a lot of people ask me now, well, now that these files have come out and we know all these terrible, horrible things that happened, well, what do we do? Well, I'll tell you what you don't do. You don't go out on the streets and start hanging people, because internally and externally, internally, if you see darkness in yourself, you've uncovered darkness in yourself, you have a dark desire, but do you resist the dark urge, right? Do you reject it? And if you reject it, it will go down into the unconscious, it will become split from you, and it will re manifest as sickness. And then, I don't say this in a pretentious tone, by the way. I have sickness. So I struggle with this myself as well. It's not like I've conquered mine. But it's important to understand that the the rejection or the slaying or the destruction of a thing is what makes it a holocaust, kindling for the ritual fire. So then, well, what do? You have a dark desire. You can't just keep that dark desire in your mind, because it makes you feel shame and guilt. It makes you feel like your true identity is, you know, bad. Well, what do we do? It's important to accept. It's very important to accept the darkness and to be rid of that darkness in the most non-emotional way, right? So let's say when the moment someone comes to me and says, "Well, I want to, hang these people," and I want to hang these people too. You think I don't? Mm, but that just makes it worse, because now you've caused trauma to yourself, trauma to the collective, and that whole scenario is going to repeat again. What you need to do is approach it from a point of no emotion. What I would do is, well, if I had a cast of people, who did terrible things. I would take them, I would imprison them, right? That's it. How, problem solved. Um, I would make them obsolete. I would make their plans obsolete, their thoughts obsolete. I wouldn't spend the next, 3 years of my life stomping on their heads because that just ruins me as well. A lot of people don't understand this. The degree of punishment cannot exceed God's plan for the person. So the greatest degree of punishment is isolation with the self, because these are all self-destructive programs at work in these people. Like we say, darkness eats darkness. You put darkness in a dark room, it's going to eat itself up until it can reach a point where it can be reborn is into light, right? So the secret of all things is that all supernatural, all paralogical, everything that is occult or hidden is an interface between the conscious mind and the collective unconscious, which has a mind of its own and its own desires and egos and so on. Everything else is diversification. Demons, devas, angelic beings. Everything else is a diversification of the higher and lower principalities that we come under the influence of, right? Mm. Sorry, I had to sip my tea there. Once you understand that, it becomes very clear what you're working and what you're working against. Once you understand that, you know how to act in these egregious situations where your emotional self is just in chaos. You have so much protest, you have so much anger, so much wrath build up, you have pent up inside of you. But understand that you're working with the same thing that you're looking to overcome on a personal level. You can't just kill trauma by causing more trauma. It's impossible to achieve that. So, clarity of mind and, how to say, righteous anger is the answer, but not unrighteous anger, not um, chaotic, destructive emotion, not killing, not wrath. Um, those cannot possibly be the answer, right? And again, I don't want to hear the thing where, like, this argument really gets me. Mm, to the point where I'll also have like a little bit of an emotional reaction to it. Well, everything is unfolding as it should. Everything, all will happen as God intended. Yes, of course. But the people who say this always forget a very important element of God's intention, which is them, themselves. Did God not intend you? Is your design not perfect? Did God not intend for these emotions that arise within you to arise? Did God not intend for you to feel a certain way, to act a certain way, to do something about your goddamn life instead of sitting on your, you know, laurels and saying, "Well, everything will happen." Being authentic to that which arises within you is the only way to integrate your shadow self. Just saying empty words doesn't change anything, my friend. Don't let any pseudo spiritualist convince you of that. Everything is perfect, but you also have to be perfect. Everything is aligned, but you also have to be aligned. Then what is the meaning and purpose and function of even having the ability to do anything? I can sit on top of a mountain and just forget about everything, right? I can reject and deny all of my emotions every single day, which a lot of people do. They seem to think that that is some some form of spiritual ascension or some sort of meditative practice. What that is a waste of God's time. That's what that is. Authenticity is the most important element of serving God and serving yourself. Not rejection, not self rejection, and not rejection of the grander consensus reality that we're all part of, to become victims of manipulators and deceitful souls. We don't say it with hatred, but it doesn't make them any less deceitful. It doesn't make them any less wrong in their ways. But the moment you let them that make you wrong in your ways is the moment you failed the lesson of spiritual advancement. Not a lot of people want to hear it because it's difficult. It's very difficult when the test and the temptation comes, when the mass trauma event unfolds, to hold yourself accountable, right? And to force yourself through will to act in a moral and ethical way. Again, disempowerment is not violence. People need to learn their vocabulary. If my enemy is looking to destroy me, right? And we are in this material plane where things are dualistically, intrinsically opposed. So if your enemy is looking to destroy you, right? Well, you love them. But what does it mean to love them? It means to do what's best for them. Is it best for them if you kill them? No, of course not. Is it best if you beat them up like beyond, you know, recognition? Of course not. What is best for them is isolation. So you provide them the blessing and the gift of isolation. You ensure their fall, you disempower them, and then you isolate them with themselves because they are also feeding into the grander collective unconscious that you are part of, whether you like it or not, whether you love it or not. The worst human being on this earth, the very worst monstrous demon serving, whatever, baby eating human on this earth is still of the same source as you are. And that's the grandest lesson, right? And you coming to terms with that for some people is impossible, right? It's just unacceptable. But I'll tell you a secret, not the secret, but a separate secret. We explained today in this spaces how an ego identity is formed, but we never explained why the true identity shatters in the first place. But we know why it shatters in the first place because it doesn't like what it sees in the mirror and it rejects it. In the pain of its reality, the truth of its existence must be so painful, it must be so upsetting and so chaotic that it would destroy itself. A soul would fragment itself into 100,000 pieces to not experience it. So if you think any of us who live in this amnesiac state, in this strange reality on earth, if you think any of us have been a good divine being or a good divine person at any point in our existence, our true identity is very wrong. Because the very fact that we exist in this fragmented state implies that we are parts of a grander whole that could not understand itself, accept itself, and it It is something that rejects itself over and over and over and over until it perfects itself. So we are all unholy. We are all incomplete. And how we make things complete is by making each other complete. So that's why I always say it's silly. It's not silly to stop your enemies in their tracks, right? It's not silly to imprison your enemies for their own well-being, but it's silly to make war against your enemies because war is destruction. I was born in war. I've seen what war is. And war is assured destruction and unhappiness and ill health and chronic disease and chronic illness and just terrible, terrible living for decades to come after the event. You need to be building. Today, the real master spiritualist, what the master spiritualist today is doing is he is building. He has a group of friends. He has 100 friends who he can call his brothers and sisters and allies, and he is building. He's setting up the foundation for when these traumatic events occur. He already knows. I already know. You already know what mass trauma events like this one and the many more to come in the next year or so will have what kind of effect it will have on the grander population, right? And we also know that a large proponent of that population will fall into wrath and anger and hatred and destruction and so on and so forth. The more monsters will be created, the Holocaust rituals, right? More souls will become bound to the earth, making it a more disgusting, you know, traumatizing experience for everyone in the consensus reality. So, what we need to do, what the master does anyway, is he creates windows, he creates portals, he sets up the foundation for after the destruction, you know, happens. Before the destruction even commences, this is what we're doing today. This is why it's important to build. It's important to make things beautiful. It's important to have a community of friends. It's important to spread sanity and ethics and clarity and self-improvement, upgrade your imaginative function, and channel better symbolic imagery from the collective consciousness. Channel better imagery, channel better information you can help the material world with because you're a conscious being who's come into a non-conscious world, and your mission and your job is to make it conscious. Your mission is not to to sow more hatred and anger, even if you righteously experience that anger. I want to say it. The inaction is stupidity, right? If you have righteous anger, so let's say when does anger occur? It occurs when your boundaries have been breached, right? So if I own a house or a garden or whatever, and the boundary of that garden is breached, right? Well, then I have the right, to neutralize my attacker. I have the right to send them off to the police. But I also have the right to feed them. I also have the right to provide them the basic necessities for them to self-isolate. You can't lose track of it, especially in moments like this, because I get so many messages. I see so many people are so angry, they're so upset. And I also see another cast of people, like I said at the start of this spaces, who are enamored and manipulated by deviant figures, who are enamored with the intellect and the communicative um, prowess of these people, right? You can't be in there too. You can't be that too. That's a big mistake. I'm not going to name names, but there are people who are highly influential and so on and so forth who have become enamored by very basic manipulation tactics, right? So it's difficult being alive today in this day and age, but it is also a blessing because you can reap many, many blessings for yourself and for others and for your soul and the collective as a whole by trying to be an exemplary person, not even being an exemplary person because the difficulty bar is so high, like just trying to build, just trying to create a fundament for future effect, right? That's already a great starting point to achieve a higher state of being. No higher state of being will ever be achieved by killing our monsters and burying them, somewhere we can't find because they still come back as disembodied spirits. This is like humanity's greatest flaw, in my opinion, greatest mistake historically humanity makes over and over and over again. This is why whole civilizations get erased because you can't just kill your enemies because no one is your enemy. There's no such thing as your enemy because even the most disgusting, abhorrent human being is of the same source. So just like you would address a cancer cell in your body, that's how you need to address, right? Um, these elements, right? Not with persistent resistance, because like let's say you address cancer with chemotherapy, right? Which also destroys the rest of your body. It destroys your whole body, right? And I understand sometimes it's a necessity to have some sort of violent display or a truly righteous crusade, right? Where a foe has to be stopped, but you only need to follow up with that physical element of it, the physical conflict of it, as is required from a spiritual sense. The moment you go beyond that threshold, the moment you land the extra punch, is the moment you lose. And I'm not saying lose in the moment. I'm saying lose in the moment in the grander scheme of things. So if you're confused on how to act and what to do is, well, build better systems, make your enemies obsolete. Don't buy into the manipulative tactics of those who would see this world destroyed or shamed or so on and so forth. Yeah, disempower your enemies in any way you can. And yes, you can have enemies, of course. And I'm not saying your enemy is not someone you shouldn't love, right? But you can have enemies in the face of, let's say, someone who would want to, I don't know, like destroy you or dismantle you or something along those lines, right? And even that, you will always receive your personal fill. It will never be something that is truly unjust because injustice doesn't exist in this world. So you will also receive the enemies that are there to teach you something. You will also receive the enemies that are there to humble you in some ways, right? You will also receive a very specific type, right? It's grand theater at the end of the day, isn't it? But in this particular field, in this particular thing, with the whole Epstein thing, um, it's very important to understand the grander motivation, the spiritual core. You're going to see a lot more people demanding this of their leaders and politicians, and hopefully, this will become a trend because what the world lacks right now is a spiritual core and spiritual leadership. There is remotely, you could count them on your two hands the amount of people who are worthy of becoming spiritual leaders nowadays, and who also have the diplomatic talent and the political talent, and a sort of like a clean slate to even enter into these arenas now, right? To do that. And but I think it'll be a long while until we get someone like that on an actual political arena. But before that occurs, the fundament is being built through small, gatherings of people in small communes, communities of spiritually of those spiritually advanced who are still, like I said in my vision, um, they're like there's so few of them, you guys. There's so few of these portals around Earth right now, and they're maintained by the warmth of families and the generosity of strangers and the selflessness of temples built in the name of that selflessness, right? Like there are so few angelic presences and guardianships on this earth right now, right? And usually like that would like force you into pessimism or they would scare you or something along those lines. But they're like to me, like how I am shown them, they're just like these small pieces of light, like a little spark, right? Little tiny sparks that permeate um like closed structures, like homes and churches and temples and stuff like that. There's few and far between, but it is where most of those who are spiritual seekers with innate knowledge, those who have a strong imaginative function and can retrieve knowledge from their past trauma memories, like we said today, those who can retrieve knowledge through visions and dreams, right? Which they think they intuit, but they don't really intuit anything. They remember parts of their true identities. Um, and they just have the intellectual capacity and the imaginative function to perceive and how to say um decipher those informations. They're all almost like gathering up in these little groups, right? That are seeking almost like a getaway from the insanity the the collective is going through right now, right? So this is not the time, unfortunately, for mass action or some sort of global movement or anything like it, because the wavelength of that movement is just is too small. These little pieces of light, they haven't really connected with one another yet. They don't have a common cause or a mutual idea. It's going to take a while. That's why I advise. I always advise to find your group of friends, like we did. If you don't have a group of friends like that, join our Kaleidoscope group. Ask to be added to our group chat, where we have actually just above 100 members now, I think. Um, have a group of friends and allow them to ground you when difficult moments like this happen, when you feel like emotionally attacked, when you feel like you just can't, you just don't know how to react because it's just so heavy and so dark, right? And we're highly sensitive people in that sense, and it's very difficult to maintain your stability in the face of so much, right? That's why you need, like I said, a group of 100 friends, right? You can call your allies that you can connect with, some to more depth, some like less, and you keep one another not in check, but you just keep one another grounded in like what matters and what the mission is and so on and so forth. If you can do that, right, great. You formed a little temple, a non-physical temple, of course, but you have formed a little temple in the ether, so to speak, that others can relate to, they can connect to it, and so on and so forth. For us, it's um important to have that. Otherwise, there's no way you don't get lost, because the emotions you go through when you read some of the accounts, and it's very bleak, right? So the emotions and stuff you go through is very, very draining. And it's very challenging. Even if you're someone who doesn't have, like, I don't have visceral reactions to things like that because I've seen my fair share of horrors in life. Right now, I understand, like, people are like, some people are more sensitive, some people are less. Even if I don't have visceral reactions, right, I still feel emotional turmoil. Of course, it's impossible not to. So, yeah, this whole space is basically is a long-winded answer to, well, what am I supposed to do right now? How am I supposed to feel? What is the next course of action? The next course of action is build beauty, make your home into a beautiful place. That's the best thing you can do right now. In my From my point of uh um consciousness, from my perspective of spiritual advancement, I don't know what's higher on there because obviously I'm not there. From my point, the best thing you can do right now is build as many temples as you can. Temples of light, of warmth, wholesome, brilliant things, things you want to see more of in this world. You have to build those things, and you have to surround yourself with people who also want to build those things. Another thing is, like, don't make money your god. That's the number one thing as well. And I know it's difficult to build things in the material plane, right, when it's ruled largely by the egregore of money. But you also have to understand that, like we said before, that money is your servant. You are not its servant. Money is designed to serve you, right? So yes, make your money, but don't serve it. Let it serve you. Let it serve a higher purpose, right? That type of thing. And number three is just take care of your health, because the chronic stress universally, with, like, just think about this for a second. Like, how many negative headlines have there been in the past 5 years? All of them. Like, every big headline that you have is incredibly negative. It's negatively charged. So war, catastrophe, virus, infectious virus killing, the betrayal, lies and deceit, right? AI slop, um, now this thing, now another war, like war footage, so on. It's all supremely negative. So obviously that impresses itself onto the collective as well. So it's going to get harder and harder if you don't own a nice spaceship. So that's why we say build your spaceship, make your home a beautiful place, because the world at large, the energy of the world at large is about to become, and it's already become, to be honest, like that, but it's about to become even more dense, even more negatively charged, even more, ugh, like that. So you need, um how to say, a shelter point where you can imprint your energy on the good days, and on the bad days it's just going to drag you through, it's going to help you through. The difficulty is definitely going up, um and we're brought, face to face with these things because it's also a call for action, like on a personal level, again, to take care of your health, manage the stress, which is basically an incredible, like impossible task, but we can still try, so to speak, right? In modern living, like, chronic stress is basically a symptom of modern living, right? Whether you work, whether you have a family to take care of, whether you watch the news or not watch the news, right? You can also disconnect for a little bit, reconnect with nature, solitude, and so on and so forth. But it's never too good when you're on a spiritual path to just disconnect completely, right? The monk goes up, to the mountain to meet himself, and then, he comes back. He doesn't stay on the mountain. Um, so think on those things, my friends. Think on, what these rituals serve. Think on how you can be building beauty, having enthusiasm, inspiration in life, and genuinely having a reason to be optimistic about the future, as ridiculous as that might sound to some people, right? Because if you ask most people now, like the average person nowadays, does oh yeah, the World War III is just around the corner, right? And it might just be, I'm not saying they're wrong, but um, build those temples, build those temples, as many as we can, and then we'll see how things go. So much love to you all. I hope this spaces was insightful. Um, Understand that you're dealing with people who have high degrees of intellect, but they do not have the inner vision. And that's what's causing their egos to just go insane. They have information that they are not ready to know and understand and decipher, and all they can do with that information is misinterpret it, misunderstand it, corrupt it, and worship things they don't even understand, right? Um, that's it, really. So much love to you all. We'll talk soon. I still wanted to make this spaces because, yeah, I got spammed a little bit, and the DMs over there. I couldn't answer everyone. How I feel about the whole situation, that's how I feel about the whole situation. Um, mm. And just like you, I am trying to, keep my emotions in check. I'm trying to, center myself and to keep building, right? That's how you make old systems obsolete, by presenting new ones that are superior, objectively better, and the old stuff just disappears. It melts away like last winter's snow, like we usually say. So, all right, bye bye to you guys. Much love.